we've already seen the verse, Ki kach ish isha uva'eleha usaneha. If a man takes a wife and has a relationship with her and then hates her. So we've seen this verse, it's in Kiteit Say, and it's going to lead to discussion of divorce. But believe it or not, this is the primary source in Torah for the idea of marriage. And it's a very vague allusion to marriage. Ki kach ish isha, when a man takes a wife. It's a very, very vague allusion. And we can see from the beginning of the Mishneh Torah that the Rambam Maimonides has enormous trouble with this because he tries to justify the institution of marriage, and he does so in a historical context, not really directly by learning the concept out from the text. So he says, before the Torah was given. So he's saying before Torah, a man would meet a woman in the marketplace. If he and she decided to marry. Really interesting that he mentions the idea of female consent right up front, even before Torah is given. And if they both decided to marry, he'd bring her home and he'd have relationships with her in private. There'd be no witnesses, and she'd be his wife. So there was no public record of the marriage, you could say, according to the Rambam, before Matan Torah. This was a private agreement. Once the Torah was given, at that point, once the Torah was given, Jews were commanded that if a man wanted to marry a woman, he must acquire her first as a wife in the presence of witnesses. And then she become his wife. And then he quotes our pasuk, Ki kach ish isha, if a man takes a wife. So Maimonides is saying that marriage is not just a private event. It's a public event as well. It requires witnesses. And of course, we can see this has legal ramifications, because if there are witnesses, then the man's financial obligations are absolutely clear and he can't back out of them. And of course, we've learned already through the whole of the Seder of Moed that a man has financial obligations and more than financial obligations with regard to his wife. So these obligations are solidified, are certified, are concretized in the fact that in order to marry her, he needs witnesses. That is the essence of the view of the world from the Rambam. And the Mishnah begins, puzzlingly, a woman can be acquired in three ways. And she acquires herself in two ways. And Maimonides comments there, by the way, really interesting comment on the grammar of this, this phrase. A woman is acquired in three ways. The Rambam is going to say in his commentary, derech tafel. The word derech, the word ways. Remember, the Mishnah begins, Ha'isha niknet bishlosha derachim. A woman is acquired in three ways or three paths. The word derech is agnostic. Derech tafel. It's agnostic. Bein al-lashon zachar, bein al-lashon nekeva. The word derech is agnostic as to whether it's masculine or feminine. We notice this, by the way, when we're reading Torah. So, for example, the Torah says, Ha derech asher yelchu ba, the path they shall walk on. That's ba, that's in the feminine. And the Torah also says, B'derech echad yetzu elecha. We read this a couple of weeks ago in the parsha of Ki Tavo. They will go out to your one path, and that's in the masculine. So we know that the word derech, the word path, is agnostic as to whether it's masculine or feminine. So we can't learn anything about the primacy of one gender or the other, particularly from the use of the word the word shlosha derachim. But the Rambam goes on. There's always a but. Umash amar ha'isha nikneit. When the Mishnah begins, a woman is acquired, rather than ha'ish koneh, a man acquires. And he's quoting here from the Gemara, the first sugya in the tractate of Kiddushin. He's summarizing the first discussion in the Gemara. When the Mishnah says begins with the word woman, rather than beginning with the word man, it teaches us that she can't be married. She doesn't become a married woman without her assent. And that if he betroths her without her consent, she is not betrothed. Im kitcha ba'al korcha eina mekudeshet. She's not betrothed. So the Gemara, and following the Gemara, the Rambam learned that the woman has a key role in this process, even though the Mishnah seems to begin with the action of the man. The woman has to agree. And then, so let's find out what these three ways are. Bishlosha derachim. So she can be acquired in three ways. This ceremony in front of witnesses can be carried out in three ways. And she acquires herself in two ways. So let's find out how she acquires. She is acquired. Nikneit b'kesef v'shtar uvavia. Okay, by money, by a document, or by intercourse. Money is, well, I translated kesef as money, but we normally give a ring today. So we can give a ring in front of witnesses or give money in front of witnesses. We can give a document. So a document's written saying, I am betrothed to you. You're betrothed to me. Or by intercourse. And the rabbis don't like this. And the Gemara hardly discusses it because the rabbis really, really don't like this. But in theory, intercourse with witnesses, now maybe these are just witnesses to the yichud, witnesses to seclusion, rather than witnesses to the act. That's a more nicer way of doing it. That can also be a way of transacting Kiddushin. But most of the tractate focuses on the first method, on kesef, on money, or on what is going to be given in place of money. And the Mishnah continues just to lay out the architecture. But kesef, with money, Beit Shammai omrim b'dinar. Beit Shammai say it's a dinar. A dinar is like a zuz. It's about a day's wage. Remember, 200 zuz is the minimum on a ketubah. So a dinar is a serious amount of money, but it's not as much as you pay to divorce to transact a divorce, but it's a reasonable amount of money. So Beit Shammai say, but dinar over shaveh dinar, with a dinar or what's worth a dinar. Beit Hillel omrim, be pruta over shaveh pruta. Beit Hillel say a peruta, or the equivalent of a peruta. A peruta is basically nothing. It's like a cent. It's the smallest possible unit of money in the Talmudic terminology. It's an eighth of an Italian issa. So Beit Hillel essentially say that the money you're handing over to solemnize a marriage is essentially a minimal quantity. Anybody should be able to do that. Beit Shammai say it's somehow not. Well, Beit Hillel will say, look, it's not dignified to get married with less than the peruta. But Beit Shammai put a larger value on it. And we know in general that Beit Shammai are they often rule in a way that's favorable to rich people. So if a poor person was not able to conduct a betrothal because he didn't have a dinar, maybe that will be okay for Beit Shammai. And how about acquiring herself? Vekonait atzma. What are the two ways? Vekonait atzma beget uvimat habal. She can acquire herself, i.e., she becomes independent with a get, with a divorce. We've learned about that, or with the death of her husband. So when her husband dies, she becomes independent. And then the Mishnah concludes, Hayavama nikneit b'via. A Yevamah is acquired by intercourse. And we've learned this already, that the bond between the Yibum and the Yevamah, the Yavam and the Yevamah, the obligation of of a woman whose husband dies childless to marry his brother if he has a brother, and to kind of procreate on her deceased husband's behalf, that is created at the moment that the husband dies. It's kind of created automatically. And either the marriage is consummated or she gives chalitza. So she can acquire herself by chalitza, in which case she's free. She can acquire herself, of course, with the death of the yavam, the death of the brother-in-law. And if they consummate the marriage, then at that point, she's married to him. So that's the architecture of the beginning of Kiddushin. And the rest of the first chapter, by the way, is going to now go off on a complete tangent and talk about other types of acquisitions. So we'll talk about acquiring many other transactions before coming back to betrothal at the beginning of chapter 2. And running through the Gemara, as we go through the tractate of Kiddushin, will be a tension between the question of whether betrothal is an emotional act. The woman has to agree. She has to love the person involved. The Gemara brings these ideas, or whether it's a legal act. And the fact that the first chapter of Kiddushin just occupies itself with legal ways of acquisition focuses on this second aspect. But both aspects, the legal aspect and the emotional aspect, run right through the tractate.